be the word cell. What does cell mean? You could say, well, I don't know without any other context. It could be the square of a spreadsheet. You have a spreadsheet and the square within that. It could be a mobile telephone network. It could be a blob of protoplasm, right? It could be, it could be a small room in a prison, right? All these different things. What does it mean? Well, you don't know apart from a sentence. You say, the prisoner walked into his cell. Well, it's a prison cell. She couldn't get the number to look correctly in the spreadsheet cell. I'm going to go call him on my cell phone. That's a mobile telephone. The scientist was looking at the cell under the microscope, right? Those sentences, just a little bit of context will help us know the more specific meaning rather than just the range of meaning. One of the dangers you find with word studies is something called illegitimate totality transfer. Okay, so it's not that essential that you adopt this terminology, though to be able to do the homework in the textbook, you probably should, and to just for specificity and clarity, I would encourage you to use this terminology. Illegitimate totality transfer is where a person illegitimately, wrongly, transfers the totality of what a word could mean into each individual instance. And sometimes this can sound really erudite, can sound learned. Someone says, here the word in the Greek is this, and then they read the definition. What does this mean? And they read all these glosses from the lexicon. They're giving the range of meaning for what that word means. But that doesn't mean each instance of the word is infused with all of those possible meanings. Language does not work that way, right? The difficult work of carefully studying the text is noting how the context allows you to properly understand, here's all these definitions, which specific definition is being used here. Which specific definition does the author intend for us to understand intuitively from the context? Do not illegitimately transfer the totality of what a word could mean into each individual instance. That's nonsense. If we did that in English, it would be utter nonsense. So don't do utter nonsense in Greek, right? Imagine someone saying, I have a cell phone. You say, oh, you have a prison phone. You have a spreadsheet phone. You have a protoplasm phone. You have a mobile phone. No, they just have a mobile phone, right? Do not confuse the range of meaning with the specific meaning.
And because that's the context of what's going on there in this part of Isaiah, N.T. Wright argues, therefore, that this phrase, God's righteousness, well, actually in Isaiah it's my righteousness, but God is the speaker, so it's God's righteousness, that this phrase, God's righteousness, is a technical term that essentially means God is going to restore Israel. It's a technical term for God's covenant faithfulness. But there's a problem with that way of doing word studies. And it's a problem that was recognized by an important scholar named James Barr in the middle of the 20th century, called illegitimate totality transfer. So if you're ever in an argument with somebody, this is a great thing. You could say, oh, that's illegitimate totality transfer. And then you've got them, and they won't know what to say. But what that means is this. I'll give you an illustration of it, okay? It's when you take a word and you say, it's all packed in with all of this theological meaning, and therefore it has all that meaning everywhere the word occurs. I'll give you an example. You know the word church in Greek is ekklesia, right? And if you look in Paul's writings, especially in Ephesians, ekklesia is used quite a bit in Ephesians, and it's filled with all this deep theological meaning, right? It's all about the body of Christ, and Christ is the head. It even has some cosmic idea, right? It's God filling all in all. It's wonderful stuff. Christ is the head, we're the bride. All this deep theology. Now, illegitimate totality transfer is saying every time the word ekklesia occurs in the Greek New Testament, it has to mean all of that glorious theology. Well, that doesn't work. I'll give you an example. In Acts chapter 7, verse 38, in the speech of Stephen, he's going through the history of the people of God, and when he comes to Israel at Mount Sinai, he uses the word ekklesia. He says this, this is the one, referring to Moses, who was in the ekklesia in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him at Mount Sinai. So he's talking about the people of Israel gathered at Mount Sinai. He calls them the ekklesia in the wilderness, or the congregation in the wilderness. So are we to say then that, are we supposed to take all of that rich theology from Hebrews and from Ephesians and cram it into Acts 7 verse 38? No, that doesn't make any sense. That's not the correct interpretation of Acts 7:38. That's illegitimate totality transfer. That's you're transferring the totality of a word that has a lot of other associations, and then you're transferring it to every other occurrence of the word. I believe that this is pretty much what N.T. Wright did with righteousness. He's reading Isaiah, and he's reading all that glorious section in Isaiah 40 to the end that deals with the restoration of Israel. And he sees all this glorious theology of the restoration of Israel and God's faithfulness to his covenant promises to Abraham in spite of Israel's sin. And then he crams all that theology into the word righteousness, as if the word righteousness itself means that. But it doesn't mean that in itself. It's not a technical term that denotes all of that theology. It's a term that can be used in that context to refer to aspects of all that theology, but it doesn't actually mean all of that theology. And so that's what I think is going on with N.T. Wright. If you look at his latest book, Paul and the Faithfulness of God, another one of those massive 1,000-pagers, he has a section about 10 pages long where he deals specifically with this issue of what does the righteousness of God mean in the Old Testament. And he basically just quotes all these verses, verse after verse after verse from Isaiah and the Psalms and Daniel, and says, see, it means God's covenant faithfulness, because that's what the context is talking about. Yeah, but there's a lot of words used in there. They don't all mean covenant faithfulness, right? So you have to be careful not to do this mistake of transferring the totality of a word's usage into every occurrence of the word.
Dr. Sproul, you quoted Martin Luther, justification by faith alone is the foundation upon which the church stands or falls. The question is, what are we to believe about N.T. Wright's doctrine of imputation? What does the new perspectives on Paul do to sola fide?
Destroys it, and the gospel with it.
Why don't you tell us what you really think?
Well, I'm trying to act with some restraint.
Well, the second part of that question was, is his view heretical?
What?
Is his view heretical?
If it isn't, then there's no such thing as heresy. Such thing as heresy.
Any of our other seminary professors care to take that on?
I'm perfectly willing to sit here all by myself and say that.
Word studies can be dangerous. Just to speak very frankly, many times people are super excited about word studies, but they're a little bit naive about them. It's sort of like someone who's excited about driving a car who's 16, and you need to say, hey, cars can really be dangerous. You can hurt people. You can kill people with a car. And so, obviously, you can't literally kill people with a word study, but you can lead them astray, right? I guess you ultimately could result in spiritual death, leading someone astray with word studies, but God forbid any of us do something like that, right?